Hello, I'm continuing my reviews on the Godzilla series with Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster, a.k.a. Ebirah Horror of the Deep. Technically, Ebirah Horror of the Deep is the official title, but it was also known as Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster, and because that's the title I'm mostly familiar with, that's what I'm going to be referring to it as in this video. Now, I have the original Japanese version of the movie on DVD from Kraken Releasing, but I also have the American version of the film, which was edited down on VHS. Now, the American version of Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster, I believe actually fell into the public domain, or at least it was mistaken for being in the public domain, and it was actually riffed on an episode of Mystery Science Theater 3000. Now, this was originally going to be a King Kong movie. Basically, after King Kong vs. Godzilla, Toho for a brief period had the rights to King Kong, and they wanted to do a standalone King Kong film, so this was originally written to be a King Kong movie, but then they decided to make it a Godzilla movie because they figured Godzilla would have more marquee value. But they did end up doing a standalone King Kong movie in 1967 called King Kong Escapes. But there are moments in the movie where you can kinda tell that Godzilla was originally supposed to be King Kong. Like, at one point in the movie, it seems like he's showing interest in a girl, and also taking the continuity of King Kong vs. Godzilla into account, Toho's version of King Kong actually has superpowers. He gets his powers from electricity, and in the film they wake Godzilla up using lightning, so that's another hint that this was originally going to be Toho's version of King Kong. Now, Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster, or Ebirah Horror of the Deep, is the 7th film in the Godzilla franchise, and this time it's not directed by Ishiro Honda. This time the directing job goes to Jun Fukuda, who would go on to direct several other Godzilla movies after this. Basically, if you look at the Showa era of Godzilla, basically the two main Godzilla directors would be Ishiro Honda and Jun Fukuda. Now, there are some definite stylistic differences between Honda's Godzilla films and Fukuda's Godzilla films. Basically, with Ishiro Honda's Godzilla films, even though they started to get goofier after a while, there was still something in them where you could tell Honda wanted them to be taken somewhat seriously. Like, he still tried to have some form of social commentary in his Godzilla movies, whereas Jun Fukuda's Godzilla films are really just pure fun. Like, you could tell that Jun Fukuda wasn't necessarily taking it as seriously as Honda was, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because I happen to really like Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster. This is actually one of my top 10 favorite Godzilla sequels. And I'm not going to claim that this is necessarily a great film. I know this one is actually very maligned by a lot of Godzilla fans, but I happen to find it to be a really fun adventure film. Now, the plot of Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster, or Ebirah Horror of the Deep, is a fisherman goes missing at sea, and his brother is determined to find him, so his brother and two other guys steal a boat so they could set sail and start looking for this guy, but little do they know that the boat was already being stolen by somebody else, a bank robber. So basically, this bank robber who was running away from the police gets dragged into this journey to find this guy's brother. But long story short, during a huge storm, the boat ends up getting attacked by a giant lobster called Ebirah. But after the boat is attacked by Ebirah, they wash up on this island, which they soon discover is a base for a terrorist organization called the Red Bamboo, who are building nuclear weapons, and they're kidnapping people from Infant Island, which is the island that Mothra is from, and forcing them to make heavy water for them. And anybody who tries to escape from the island is killed by Ebirah. So, basically what ends up happening is the main characters team up with this girl from Infant Island who got away from the terrorists, and now they're trying to figure out how to stop the Red Bamboo, and they ultimately discover Godzilla asleep in this cave, and they wake Godzilla up to make life a living hell for these terrorists. And then Godzilla ends up fighting Ebirah, and Mothra ends up getting involved in the story a little bit, but doesn't really do much, to be honest. And I really liked the characters in this movie. Sure, they are kind of goofy, but that really didn't bother me. I found the characters to be a lot of fun. But who really stole this movie, in my opinion, was Akira Takarada as the bank robber. Sure, his arc in the movie is a little cliched, like, he's a bank robber who turns out to be a really good person, and the events of the movie kind of causes him to turn his life around. Sure, it's cliched, but it worked for me, and it worked for the movie. You also have Kumi Mizuno, who played Miss Namikawa in the previous film, playing the native girl who the main characters team up with, and she's really good in the film. And you have Akihiko Hirata as the main human villain of the film. Jun Tazaki plays another one of the human antagonists of the film. The Shobijin, who are Mothra's twin fairies, also show up in the movie, but they're not played by the Peanuts this time. This time they're played by a duo called Pair Bambi. I don't know too much about them, but I believe they were a singing duo in Japan, kind of like the Peanuts. But again, I do really like this one. I like the characters in it, and I think it's a really fun adventure movie. And yes, you can tell that this film has a significantly lower budget than the previous films, but that really doesn't bother me. Now, before I end this video, I figured that since this film is about a giant lobster, why not I ask an actual lobster what he thinks of Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster or Ebirah Horror of the Deep. So, Mr. Lobster, do you think Ebirah is a good representation of your people? Hello? Do you have any thoughts on this movie whatsoever? You did watch the movie, right? Okay, that little short review from the Lobster didn't really work out the way I wanted it to. Well, here's my friend Christian Feliciano giving his thoughts on Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster.
When it comes to Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster, I asked myself, why the hell didn't they just put James Bond in this series at this point? Because it kind of does have that secret agent stuff to it, because there is a evil organization out there, and they're in this film, and it's like, huh? You know what I mean? Yeah, you get some of that in the other whatever, but I'm just, you ask yourself, huh? Like, why? What? Like, couldn't Godzilla just fight the lobster and that's it, But hey, what are you gonna do? They did it, and it's fun. It's a way to, get us into the universe, because I guess we do need that guide character, those guide characters to kind of lead us into this world of the fantastic. And something to be engaging, I guess, other than just seeing two creatures beat each other up. I guess, you get more story. I really enjoy it. It's corny, but that's what you're going to get. I mean, it's really fun. It's a kid's movie. It's enjoyable. The character of the sea monster is not one of my favorite villains, though. That's the only problem. Like, just the idea of a giant lobster is... even Mothra is more creative to me than that. I feel like, even Rodan, the design of Mothra, the design of Rodan, Ghidorah, at this point, it's very creative, very fun, these characters, the mythologies behind them. But when it comes to this lobster creature, I'm like, It's a fun movie, I enjoy it, but just the creature itself is just like, what are you gonna do? It's a giant lobster. I don't know, I just never really found the villain that fascinating in this one. It's not really, to me, that creative. Yeah, like I said, what gets you through it, or the characters, what gets you through it is seeing what they go through. And, of course, Godzilla fighting this lobster. That's fun, but at the end of the day, literally, you can take this villain out, and you could have put any other creature. I mean, at that point, just make a possum and just make it big. And there you go, you got your villain. Take a crab, take a plankton, and just make it giant, and there you go, you got Godzilla versus a plankton, yay. And there you go, you can do that. But still, like I said, I enjoy the film. I just not really a big fan of that lobster creature. But yeah, overall, I enjoy it. Recommend it to everyone who just wants to see Godzilla. I don't recommend it to anybody who's just jumping onto Godzilla. If you see this one and you're like, oh, look, a Godzilla film, don't pick this one up, because it's just going to turn you off to the other ones. I would recommend you go and watch King Ghidorah. Go watch, Mothra vs. Godzilla, King Kong vs. Godzilla, the original Godzilla. Any other Godzilla should be your first Godzilla, except the 1998 one. Avoid that at all costs. But for just the original Godzilla films, I would avoid watching this one first, only because, it's not really that interesting. To me, as I mentioned before, every hero is as great as his villains, and that's the big disappointment of this. This feels like one of the first Marvel films where the villains were just like, it's a fun movie, but that's pretty much how I feel about this. So thank you so much for listening, and bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed his take on this movie, and I hope you enjoyed this video overall. That was my review on Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster, and bye.